Trump's Senate Republican support as the impeachment saga continues to escalate. Just into CNN tonight, this reaction from Republican Senator Susan Collins of Maine. Quote, "I thought the president made a big mistake by asking China to get involved in investigating a political opponent. It is completely inappropriate." Now she joins a small group of Republican senators, including Mitt Romney and Ben Sasse, who have been criticized by the president and are criticizing this president, criticizing him for asking foreign powers to investigate his political rival, Joe Biden. The president seemingly spent his entire day tweeting attacks against Romney, at one point referring to him as a pompous expletive. More on that in just a moment. But first, the importance of the Republican criticism. The math. You need 67 senators to impeach and remove a president. Democrats and two independent allies hold 47 seats, meaning they need 20 Republicans to defect for the two-thirds vote. But the cracks aren't just showing up in Congress. Even one of the president's staunchest defenders on air and online, Fox's Tucker Carlson, says Trump's Ukraine call was inappropriate, adding, "Some Republicans are trying, but there's no way to spin this as a good idea." Let's get right to CNN's Jeremy Diamond at the White House. Jeremy, all of this comes as the White House indicates it won't cooperate right now with the request to hand over documents to Congress.
That's right. The White House counsel's office is indeed drafting a letter to the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi that essentially says they don't feel compelled to comply with any of these document requests until House members take this impeachment inquiry to a vote on the House floor, essentially voting to formally open this impeachment inquiry. That's something Nancy Pelosi says that she does not have to do, despite the fact that it has been a precedent in some past impeachment inquiries. What we do know, though, is the White House sees this as a political opportunity as well. They would love to see those moderate Democrats, those Democrats who won in 2018 in Trump districts, take a vote on this impeachment inquiry. And that's something that they've also been fundraising off of in recent weeks. We already saw the Trump campaign in the first 48 hours of opening that impeachment inquiry raise $8.5 million.
And in the meantime, let's talk more about the president's tweet storm against Mitt Romney.
That's right. We also have this development, this continuing saga between the president and Republican Senator Mitt Romney, after Senator Romney yesterday said that it was appalling for the president of the United States to ask China to investigate his political rival, Joe Biden. We now have the president firing back. In a series of tweets, he calls Senator Romney a pompous ass, and he also is now calling for the impeachment of Senator Romney. So by the president's logic there, it is not acceptable. It is not an impeachable offense to ask your foreign governments to investigate your political rivals, but it is to criticize the president for doing exactly that. But the president here is sending a clear message to any Republican who would step out of line with his position on this Ukraine matter. However, as we are seeing now, Senator Romney is not the only Republican senator to be criticizing the president. We also saw Senator Collins say it was completely inappropriate for President Trump to ask China to investigate Joe Biden. Anna.
Jeremy Diamond at the White House for us. Thank you for that update. Joining us now, CNN political commentator and former Clinton White House press secretary Joe Lockhart, and CNN political analyst and Washington bureau chief for the Associated Press, Julie Pace. Julie, Mitt Romney, Ben Sasse, and now Susan Collins, another Republican senator, telling the president your conduct is not okay. You also have Senator Rubio suggesting today he's open to where the facts lead in this impeachment probe. How significant is this?
I think it's significant because Republicans have been loath to criticize the president in any way for much of his tenure. But what you do see is this straddle from some of these Republicans. They're saying the conduct was inappropriate, but they're not necessarily weighing in on whether it's impeachable. We've seen some other Republicans say exactly that. It was improper, but not impeachable, trying to preserve a little bit of space. The president, though, doesn't take any criticism well. So the mere fact that these Republicans are saying that his behavior was wrong, clearly by today's tweets, show that he's not going to take those cracks very well going forward.
Joe, what should Democrats on the Hill be reading into this?
Well, you know, Mitt Romney is not a surprise, and the president's response is not a surprise. It has really nothing to do with Mitt Romney. It has to do with sending a message to the rest of the Republican senators. If you cross me, I will treat you this way. I will try to destroy you politically. And Romney's a useful tool for Trump in that way. I think Susan Collins is the most interesting one because she in the past has had strong support from Democrats in Maine and has put together a moderate coalition and has had real trouble with the very conservative Maine Republicans. Post-Kavanaugh vote, she's not going to get very many Democratic votes. She needs those right-wing Trump Maine voters. And she still thinks she needs some moderate voters, so she's stuck. I still think she will do what she normally does, which is express concern and then vote with Trump. But she is the most interesting, particularly because she's in cycle. She has to face the voters next year.
Right.
Mitt Romney doesn't.
And it's like 2024 or something when he's up.
Exactly.
Do you see a maybe strategy developing here among Republicans, which is, call out the behavior, but maybe not go so far as to say impeach. In fact, maybe say don't impeach, let the voters decide.
Yeah, I really think you've seen a hardening of strategies in the last few days on all sides. The Democrats have now are firmly in the we're moving forward because it's protecting the Constitution. The president is saying now, I did nothing wrong. I'd do it again. It was a perfect phone call. There's nothing wrong with it. No crime. It's a hoax. Republicans on the Hill trying to sit in the middle, saying it was inappropriate. Many of them will say it's inappropriate, but it doesn't rise to the level of impeachment. You shouldn't impeach the president over that. They are hoping they can stay there. But what Democrats and the investigation might prove is it's become very difficult as each revelation comes out about how deep and how many people were involved in this conspiracy. But that's what they're going to try, I think, as a strategy.
Julie, the president calling out Romney again just within the last hour. He's been doing it all day, but here is the latest. Mitt, get off the stage. You've had your turn twice. And he linked a video of Romney's 2012 loss to President Obama. What does this tell you about the president's mindset tonight?
Well, I think Joe's right. This isn't really about Mitt Romney. This is about sending a signal to other Republicans that he's not going to let any criticism slide by quietly. I mean, to be clear, Romney, though he is pretty forceful in criticizing Trump's behavior, is still stopping short of saying that he thinks this is an impeachable offense. So the president is trying to warn Republicans, those Republicans who know they look out at their own personal political futures and know that at this point, polls show that Trump's standing with the Republican Party is extremely strong. And so they have to figure out how to maintain that base if they're going to start criticizing the president's behavior. I think we'll be watching those polls really closely in the weeks and months to come. If the president's support with Republican voters changes, then I think you will see this dynamic flip on its head. But that just isn't happening at this point.
Well, I will say, though, our latest CNN poll did show there was some additional support for impeachment of this president, and the group that is moving are independents and Republicans in this latest CNN poll. Not significantly, not like the majority of Republicans are saying they want him impeached, but there is some movement, which we are going to continue to watch. But I also want you guys to listen to what the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, said just today in Athens, Greece, about this Ukraine scandal and claims of quid pro quo. Take a look.
We wanted to make sure that we were doing this with a government that was straight up and would use that money for the things that it said it would use that money for. Nations do this. Nations work together and they say, boy, goodness gracious, if you can help me with X, we'll help you achieve Y. This is what partnerships do. It's win-win. It's better for each of us. I'm not offended when your prime minister asks me, can you help us with X? Right? It doesn't bother me a lick.
Joe, is that how things are supposed to work, and is that what actually happened here?
It's actually an absurd notion. What diplomats will talk about is people will make moves to help each other's mutual interest, and sometimes their own interest. Sometimes we will do something for a country in return for help on something else. But you have to, what is that help? He's asking another country who we have tremendous power over, that was invaded by the Russians and Crimea was annexed, to dig up or manufacture dirt on one of his political opponents in return for doing what Congress had already appropriated $400 million in military aid. The argument is ridiculous on its face, but I think what you're really trying to see is Pompeo work his way out of this. He's the one character in this among the cabinet secretaries who still has political ambitions. He wants to be senator from his home state. And I think he's looking for a way out, and this, I think, was part of it, very much minimizing his role. And you're going to see, I think, a lot of finger pointing. I mean, Trump now, apparently, according to some reporting, is blaming the energy secretary for all of this. It's a bit of a circular firing squad, and it's how a lot of this information will come out.
Julie, on the subpoenas, because now we know the Democrats have served a subpoena on the White House to turn over more documents. Given this vitriol between President Trump and the Democrats, what incentive would the White House have, at this point at least, to make things any easier for Democrats by cooperating?
I think this is the central question that is facing this White House right now, which is do they cooperate, and if so, how fully? Because we've already seen Pelosi and Schiff come out and say, if you don't cooperate, we will likely pursue an article of impeachment that focuses on obstruction of Congress. So the choice before this White House is, do you cooperate and risk putting forward information that is politically damaging, that is embarrassing, that looks bad for the president and others in the administration, or do you basically hand Democrats their first article of impeachment? That's a very crucial decision. Right now, they seem to be leaning toward not cooperating, but they do need to know the reality that will likely follow that.
Julie Pace and Joe Lockhart, great to have both of you with us. Thank you.
Thanks.
Up next, how the impeachment saga is being covered on conservative outlets and how that may play into the silence from most Republicans. This week, after denial from the White House and amid a mountain of evidence indicating otherwise, President Trump admitted openly to the very offense at the center of his impeachment battle, asking a foreign country for dirt on a political rival. And now it's not just Ukraine. He's calling on China to investigate Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden. And this time, he did so on the White House lawn.
China should start an investigation into the Bidens, because what happened in China is just about as bad as what happened with Ukraine. So I would say that President Zelensky, if it were me, I would recommend that they start an investigation into the Bidens.
Just a quick reminder, China is an authoritarian communist regime known for strict governmental control, where dissidents go missing, freedom of the press is restricted. This is how one Republican Senator, Ben Sasse, responded to the president. Hold up. Americans don't look to Chinese commies for the truth. If the Biden kid broke laws by selling his name to Beijing, that's a matter for American courts, not communist tyrants running torture camps. Sasse is one of the few dissenting Republican voices. Most other Republicans have either backed the president or remained silent. CNN contacted the offices of more than 80 Republican lawmakers in the House and the Senate to see if any were concerned about President Trump's call for China to probe Joe Biden. Not many responded, and just a handful expressed misgivings. I want to bring in my next guest, Timothy Snyder. He's a Yale University professor and the author of The Road to Unfreedom. He also wrote the book On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century. Professor Snyder, so glad you could be with us. Thank you. This is an important discussion. Look, without the support of 20 Republican senators, even if this president is impeached, he would not be removed from office. Based on what we know so far regarding this Ukraine scandal, what we heard from the president on China, what is your message to lawmakers? Does this president pose a threat to democracy?
Well, it's very clear that he poses a threat to something much more fundamental, which is the rule of law. Mr. Trump likes to talk about corruption. What corruption means is breaking the law on a grand scale. When you ask foreign leaders, when you send your minions around the world to collect information against domestic political opponents, that is corruption. It violates the law, it violates American law, but it also violates the spirit of what a democracy is all about, namely a fair competition between Americans for American political office.
What's your assessment of where we are right now?
We're in a very strange place where the President of the United States pursuing what he thinks of as corruption, has done perhaps the most corrupt thing in the history of American politics. I mean, after all, making phone calls around the world and sending people around the world to pursue a political opponent in the name of corruption is like stealing all the money in the Federal Reserve in the name of preventing, I don't know, petty theft. I mean, the thing that you say you're against, you've just done, and on a massive, massive scale. Where we are, I think we're reeling. I think Americans need to look at the basic facts about this and ask themselves, is there anything worse than this that can happen?
And when you talk about Americans looking at the facts, Americans aren't believing the facts. There's this new poll out. 40% of Republicans believe the president talked to the Ukrainian president about investigating Joe Biden. Only 40% of Republicans believe what the White House put out in the transcript from that phone call, what the president himself has admitted to. Why don't Republicans believe what the facts are?
Well, I mean, I would say respectfully that that number shows that a lot of Republicans have a healthy sense of right and wrong, and they simply can't believe that the president would have done something like that. And so their first impulse is to say, well, that must be the other side's propaganda. But of course, as you say, not only did it happen, not only is the evidence abundant, the president is insisting to them over and over again that he did it. So I would say we should probably give this some time, because the instinct about what's right and wrong is the thing which tells people he couldn't have done that thing, but he did do that thing.
I just wonder, though, if the president's war against the media, the president's war on facts is having an effect.
It's having an effect not just on us, but on him. I mean, if this country is going to recover, it's going to recover on the basis of a lot more journalistic work than we have right now. We're hanging on by our teeth thanks to the work of a couple thousand journalists. Without the journalists, we wouldn't know anything about this story. But what this whole Ukraine scandal reveals is that Mr. Trump and the people around him are beginning to believe in their own fictions. The idea that the Democratic National Committee's server, for example, is in Ukraine, that's really crazy time stuff. And he's getting himself impeached on the basis of something which is a pure fiction. And what's more interesting and more threatening is that he's trying to get foreign leaders to believe our fictions. That's a turn, you asked about democracy, that's a turn away from democracy into something much more frightening, because it's personal authoritarian or totalitarian regimes where the leader defines what the truth is, and then people run around trying to make the world match his lies.
Wow, that's so interesting. What do you see as the role of conservative media in sort of propping up this president?
I think we've got a big problem of political education. So I'm a college professor. If I'm giving a midterm in a week or two, my students will know exactly when. And if one of them cheats and I catch him cheating and I say, it's okay, I'll lie about it with you. Hey, let's both lie about it. That's a problem in his education. This is a situation we're facing. Mr. Trump knew perfectly well that Russia intervened on behalf of his campaign. He said as much. And yet the response of many leading Republicans has been to say, don't worry, that's all right. For 3 years, we'll just lie with you in public about it. What lesson was Mr. Trump to learn? Of course, the lesson he learned was that it's okay for foreign countries to intervene. It's okay for foreign countries to be on your side. Why not solicit more of it? I think that's the role that they've played thus far. They've created this system where it seems okay for him to do what he's doing. I think it would be a good time for them to stop.
The Russian president was asked this week about concerns that Russia might interfere in the upcoming 2020 election, and here's how he responded. I'm quoting, "I'll tell you a secret. Yes, we'll definitely do it. Just don't tell anyone." That last part was in a bit of a whisper, but it seems like he's saying the quiet part out loud. How significant is it for him to so openly go there?
I think it's just part of Russia's general policy. Russia's general policy is to mess around enough in our elections that things that they like happen. And one of the things they like is that we're very uncertain. Mr. Trump winning has helped them because he pursues their policies, but he's also helped them because he pursues this enormous uncertainty. So naturally they're going to say, we're going to intervene the next time around. Mr. Trump has basically said it's open season on American elections, so they'd be missing the bus if they didn't.
Timothy Snyder, it's great to have you with us. I really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you.
by CNN details Rudy Giuliani's influence on President Trump's perception of Ukraine, as he tried to convince the president that Ukraine's new government was serious about stopping corruption. Volker revealed that he met in late May with President Trump, who insisted Ukraine was a corrupt country full of terrible people. The president said, "They tried to take me down." The president referring to a theory that it was Ukraine, not Russia, that interfered in the 2016 election. That has been debunked. Volker also released pages of text that show how the Trump administration, with the help of Rudy Giuliani, was determined to push Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden and his son, as well as that debunked theory. On July 25th, the day of Trump's phone call with Ukrainian President Zelensky, Volker texted Zelensky's aide. Heard from the White House, assuming President Z convinces Trump he will investigate, get to the bottom of what happened in 2016, we will nail down date for visit to Washington. But Volker insisted in his statement he never took part in an effort to encourage Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden, saying the suggestion that he would be influenced in his duties as vice president by money for his son simply has no credibility to me. I know him as a man of integrity and dedication to our country. But Volker's involvement in influencing Ukrainian policy is clear from this text in early August to Rudy Giuliani. "Hi, Mr. Mayor. Had a good chat with Yermak last night. He was pleased with your phone call. Mentioned Z making a statement. Can we all get on the phone to make sure I advise Z correctly as to what he should be saying?" The statement was supposed to lay out how Ukraine would pursue corruption investigations into the 2016 election and a company Hunter Biden was involved in. But that statement was never released. On August 30th, the top American diplomat in Ukraine, William Taylor, tells Volker that the president has canceled his trip to Ukraine. The next day, Taylor texts Gordon Sondland, a prominent Republican donor and U.S. ambassador to the European Union. Are we now saying that security assistance and White House meeting are conditioned on investigations? Sondland responds, "Call me." On September 9th, Taylor again brings up the point. As I said on the phone, I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign. Sondland texts back hours later, defending the president. I believe you are incorrect about President Trump's intentions. The president has been crystal clear, no quid pro quos of any kind. Volker also said in his opening statement that he did become aware that foreign aid to Ukraine was being held up at the same time he was connecting Ukrainian leadership aides with Rudy Giuliani. But Volker said he did not perceive those two issues to be linked in any way. Jessica Schneider, CNN, Washington.
Bernie Sanders returning home after being hospitalized for a heart attack. When we expect him back on the campaign trail next. Home after being hospitalized for a heart attack.
How you doing?
Hi, Senator.
How are you, Senator?
How are you feeling?
Good. Thank
Hi,
you.
Jane.
Hi, guys.
You happy to be home?
Very.
The Democratic presidential candidate and his wife Jane arrived at their home in Vermont a short time ago. The senator spent 2 nights in a Las Vegas hospital after what doctors now confirm was a heart attack, and he underwent a stent procedure. Sanders is still slated to participate in the CNN debate on October 15th. A new sign tonight that nuclear talks between the U.S. and North Korea are at an impasse. After 8.5 hours of discussions today in Stockholm, the North Korean delegation said talks had broken down and blamed the U.S. for, quote, not bringing anything to the negotiating table. State Department officials, however, disputed that characterization, saying the U.S. previewed a number of new initiatives building on the president's past meetings with Kim Jong-un. U.S. officials expect to return to Stockholm in 2 weeks to continue discussions. In a classic follow the money story, an elite team of investigators works together to take down one of the most violent and dangerous Colombian cartels of the 1990s. It's the subject of a brand new episode of the CNN series Declassified.
Romney and I began interviewing the women, it was exclusively women, that worked at these stores.
But they wouldn't make any statements or give up any information.
The women were petrified. As a prosecutor, I'd seen people concerned about deportation. I'd seen people concerned about being charged with a crime. But the level of terror that I witnessed in these women was something I hadn't seen before. And it took all of our interviewing skills to get them.
When it comes to the president's call with Ukraine, Trump says it isn't about politics, it's about corruption. We get a fact check now from Tom Foreman.
Anna, the president's chief talking point that he just wants to stop corruption flies in the face of his now well-established tendency to utterly ignore corruption when his allies or friends are allegedly involved. Take Israel. Trump has praised, encouraged, and supported Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu repeatedly, even as speculation over an indictment on bribery and breach of trust charges has loomed. In Russia, Trump has defended and admired President Vladimir Putin repeatedly, despite American intelligence forces saying definitively that the Russians interfered in the 2016 election, and despite long-standing accusations of corruption, brutality, and even murder against Putin's regime. Trump has said incredibly kind things about North Korea's Kim Jong-un, who heads one of the 5 most corrupt governments on the planet, according to the World Economic Forum. In China, the Communist Party has long been accused of corrupt dealings, political and economic cronyism, human rights abuses, and much more. And yet Trump has invited them, amid trade negotiations, to help investigate a potential Democratic rival, Joe Biden and his son, using vague and bombastic language. And of course, he's asked Ukraine to do the same, even though that country has long struggled with its problems of corruption. Here in the States, similar story. Right now, top members of Trump's team are being investigated for their roles in what many political watchdogs say is a clear case of corruption, not to mention all those allegations that Trump is using the White House to push his private business, that he's hiding something in the tax returns he refuses to release, and that he stonewalls every single effort to investigate anyone close to him for, yes, alleged corruption. Anna?
Tom, thank you. Coming up, a look back at how past presidents have stared down impeachment.
People have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
During Watergate, Clinton, during Lewinsky, 2 presidents, 2 famous declarations, and 1 strategy. Deny, deny, deny.
I have never obstructed justice. And I think, too, that I can say that in my years of public life, that I welcome this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
I want you to listen to me. I'm going to say this again. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. I never told anybody to lie, not a single time, never.
We know what happened next. Nixon lost his presidency. Clinton was impeached because they lied, fearful that the truth would undermine the office. Fast forward to today, we're seeing a much different strategy from another president in crisis. Just say what you did out loud, double down, don't apologize, and then maybe people will think, well, how bad could it really be?
There was nothing done wrong. It was perfect. The conversation was perfect. It couldn't have been nicer. I think you should ask. We actually, that was the second conversation. I think you should ask for the first conversation also. This is about corruption. And if you look and you read our Constitution and many other things, I have an obligation to look at corruption. I have an actual obligation and a duty.
Everything is perfect, he said, except maybe the newest impeachment polling. And it shows Americans are more eager to impeach Trump now than they were at similar points in the Clinton and Nixon impeachment sagas. Tim Naftali is a CNN presidential historian and former director of the Nixon Presidential Library. Tim, as always, it's good to see you, especially to put these things in context. And here we go. Everyone knows, Nixon's "I am not a crook" line. I heard you say this week that Trump publicly saying, Ukraine and China should investigate Biden is essentially like him saying, I am a crook. Where does that put us?
Well, it shows, well, first of all, it's been President Trump's approach since he was a candidate, which is to immunize the public about his amorality and his approach to the office of the presidency. Richard Nixon was a student of the presidency. He loved history, and he had a vision of what Americans and he expected of a president. Now, he fell short of that. He didn't want the public to know the gap between what he thought they expected from a president and the reality of Richard Nixon. So when the public began to realize the difference between the real Richard Nixon and the ideal president, it really undermined his credibility with the public. Donald Trump, on the other hand, Donald Trump says, what you see is what you get. And by saying, Richard Nixon said, Americans, you don't want a crook as your president. I am not a crook. Donald Trump is saying, Americans, you understand me. You know what I do. You know the enemies I'm fighting. I am corrupt, but you don't really care, do you? Because what's more important to you is that I stay in office. These are fundamental